Good morning. Good morning and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Sahai and I'm the Communications Manager at the CMRAO. Also with me here today, I have Karina, I have Danielle. Today's webinar will focus on the CMRAO complaints process and will be presented by Arlani and Sandy Vizely. Today's webinar will focus on the CMRAO complaints process. And as I said earlier, we'll cover a number of things, including why the CMRAO accepts complaints. We'll review some of the data related to complaints. We'll look at some of the outcomes, and then we'll answer some questions. So just a bit of housekeeping before we begin. Please feel free to submit questions at any point during the webinar. We'll try to get to as many of the questions as possible. There are already a number in the queue, but we'll do our very best to get to your questions. Also, at the end of the webinar, there will be a short survey, and we ask you to just take a few moments to complete the survey for us. It really helps, your feedback helps us to shape future webinars, and again, gives us a sense of what we can do to improve our subsequent webinars. Finally, if you have any colleagues who weren't able to join us today, we do plan to post today's webinar on our website, cmrao.ca, as well as on our YouTube channel, so you can look for the webinar there. If you are active on social media, please follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, as well on YouTube. So just to get things started, we'd like to get a sense of who is connecting with us today. So our very first poll question should be popping up on your screen right now. What is your role in the condo management sector? Please click the response that best describes your role in the condo management sector. Are you a condo manager? Are you a condo owner? Are you a condo director? Do you work in the sector in an administrative capacity or other? We'll keep the poll open for another few seconds. We have some answers coming in. We'll take another 2 seconds to collect responses, and let's close this poll. So 93% of you joining us today are condo managers, and then another 2% of you are condo owners, and 3% of you are working in administrative capacity, and then 2% have identified as other. Thank you all for joining. So just before I introduce our first speaker, I wanted to mention that the complaints process is an important interface between the CMRAO, the condominium community, and the condo management sector. It gives owners and residents a place to take their concerns about the conduct of CMRAO licensees. So the other thing I'd like to note quickly is that today's webinar is intended to provide you with an overview of the process. We're not going to be resolving individual complaints over the next hour, but what we do hope is that it provides you with a certain amount of clarity about what the process involves and does not involve. So that's going to be it from me for now. So I'll turn things over to our first presenter, Arlani, CEO and Registrar of the CMRAO.
Good morning, everyone. Today we have about 125 attendees to this webinar, and I think everybody understands the importance of the complaint process. We have been continually receiving requests from the industry and also from the condominium community about the clarifying and explaining the complaint process. CMRAO's role as a regulator deals with the licensing of condominium management sector. The reason for this licensing scheme is that public protection and the consumer protection is a goal for the government. And in order to have a credible licensing scheme and proper regulation of the industry, we have to make sure that not only we are addressing the needs of the industry with respect to licensing, but also we are providing avenue and the scheme for people who can complain about our licensees. It is an integral part of any professional licensing system in this province. Just to give you a sense of complaints and how many complaints we are getting. If we look at the past 12 months, we have had about close to 800 complaints. And this on average means that, one complaint for every 4 licensees that we have. If you look at daily basis, it's about 3 to 4 complaints every day that we receive about condominium managers and condominium management services. What this kind of indicates that our organization has been exposed over the past 2 years to vast number of complaints and different types of complaints. And it's critical for the industry and our licensees to understand that where we are getting these complaints and how we are dealing with processing of them. Many of the complaints that we receive are not necessarily formal complaints. They are issues and concerns that are raised to us, and it deals more with the internal operation of a condo, such as repair and maintenance. Though we take all of the complaints seriously, we are especially interested in the complaints that violate the Condominium Management Services Act and its regulations, including Code of Ethics, which is cornerstone of our licensing scheme. I just want to make sure it is understood that the process that we follow has to be fair, has to be transparent, and has to respect privacy of the complainant as well as our licensees. And we are diligently following this path to make sure that the CMRAO in its processes is functioning within the legal framework, and it's fair in terms of its process. Just to give you a sense of where we are getting complaints from and areas of complaints. As you can see, majority of the complaints we are receiving over the last year deal with the conduct of licensees, which includes things like unprofessional conduct when communicating with residents, and inappropriate written language, rudeness, being unresponsive, not fulfilling duties as per their contract. We totally understand that in any kind of service environment, especially the service environment that you are working in as licensees, there are going to be instances of misunderstanding and interactions which are not ideal. We totally understand that, but it's important for us to make sure that you're functioning within your code of conduct and you are providing the consumer protection that it is intended. If you look at blue boxes that we have highlighted, you see that you see areas that CMRAO is particularly interested in because they fall into the legal framework and also Code of Ethics. The area of records and transfer of records, in the area of financials, such as procurement policies that condo managers are, are following. In the area of proxies is still the complaints coming in. And finally, the most critical area is about unlicensed practices. These complaints are coming through different avenues to us, and it's not only from residents. We receive from other condo managers as well as other segment of the industry. So at this point, I will pass the microphone back to our coordinator, and thank you so much for attending.
Thanks very much, Ali. So we're going to do another poll just before we introduce our next presenter. But this time, you're going to use the question window of your control panel. So, which is right here. And this is what the box you'll use to type any questions that you might have throughout the webinar. Just as a quick note, this little orange arrow right here is going to help you to minimize your screen. So it will collapse and expand your control panel. So as I said, this question, we're going to use the question window. Then afterwards, you might want to collapse it so that you will have an unobstructed view of the rest of the slides. All right, so next poll question. What city or town are you connecting from today? Please type your responses in the question window. What city or town are you connecting to today's webinar from? Okay, we have some answers coming in. Thornhill, Cambridge, Collingwood, Windsor, fantastic, Hamilton, Mississauga, North Bay, Vaughan, Barrie, Muskoka, excellent. Brantford, Kitchener, St. Catharines, Ottawa, this is wonderful. Aurora, again, London, Newmarket, Whitby, Richmond Hill. This is great. The CMRAO regulates condo managers and management companies across the province, so it's really great that we have most of the province covered here. Oh, we even have Edmonton. Interesting. Welcome to you all. Brampton, Guelph, Port Perry, fantastic. Welcome to all of you. So without any further delay, I'd like to just turn things over to our Deputy Registrar, Sandy Vizely.
Thank you, Sahai. And thank you to everyone again for attending today. I wanted to start by saying that I have had the opportunity to present on this topic a number of times over the past year or so at different industry events and the like. And each and every time, it's always an interesting topic to cover. It's always a very engaging crowd. I think that one of the reasons for that is probably that there is a certain level of anxiety, a bit of nervousness even, within the sector about the complaints process. And it's great to be able to have an opportunity where you can address the topic in a more kind of interactive forum where we can speak to it and also have the opportunity to take questions at the end of the presentation. So today I'm going to get into a few things. I'm going to talk about the types of complaints that CMRAO is interested in hearing about. I'm going to touch on a few examples. I'm also going to talk about the types of complaints that we're not interested in hearing about. I'm going to talk about the intake process, the assessment process, so how people file a complaint, how we deal with it internally here. I'm going to talk about what our licensees, so condo managers and management provider companies, should expect from the CMRAO when a complaint is filed. And then finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about the discipline process. So what can happen at the end of a complaint and share a few statistics about that. So, but first of all, what types of complaints are we interested in hearing about? Very broadly speaking, we want to hear about complaints that fall within our jurisdiction. And what does that mean? It means we want to hear about complaints that would constitute a violation of the Condominium Management Services Act and its regulations, which would include the Code of Ethics. So really specifically, we're interested in matters that relate to the provision of condominium management services. So some examples would include, first one off the bat, providing condominium management services without a license. So licensing is mandatory in Ontario. It has been now for just over 2 years. If you, as an owner in a condominium, or if you're a condominium manager and you know of somebody that's providing management services without a license, and it's not someone that would be exempt under regulation from doing so, we want to hear about that. It is an offense under the Act. It's important that we address that, and that's important from our perspective to make sure that people who need a license are licensed, and if they're not going to be licensed, that they're dealt with. And I think it's also important from the sector's perspective. Remember, this is a license is not free. There's an annual fee that goes along with it, and it's certainly not fair to people who are paying those fees to be licensed, while others maybe aren't. So right off the bat, yes, if you know of this, please let us know. Another example we have here is the solicitation of proxy forms as defined under Section 53 of the CMSA. Section 53 basically says, managers, you shall not solicit for proxy forms. And then our general regulation says, actually, it's okay to solicit for proxy forms as long as you're only doing so for the purposes of establishing quorum. A little while back, we also published a guide about this topic, so it gets into some more details about what's the manager's involvement in the collection, the distribution of proxy forms, what's okay, what's not okay. So for example, is it okay to pre-populate a proxy form? Well, maybe some things are okay, some things aren't. If you're putting in a list of people who are candidates for board positions, our recommendation, actually I'll say our rule would be make sure you list those people in alphabetical order. And the reason for that is there's an underlying principle here that's very important to us. The manager really has to be an impartial administrator of the process. You shouldn't be doing anything really that would indicate any kind of favoritism towards one person or another. So that's that. Next, we also have any issues related to records management. which would include failure to transfer records to a client at the end of a contract. So records management is a critical part of a condo manager's job, and this does extend right to the end of a contract. It is absolutely a requirement under the Act that once that contract is up, the management provider transfers the records over to the condominium corporation, and usually actually directly to the new management provider coming in. The provisions under the Condominium Act around that as well. General regulation allows for 15 days from the end of the contract for that to happen, but realistically and ideally what we'd like to see is a much smoother, very professional transition that happens even before the contract comes to an end. So that's an issue we like to hear about. Violating the conditions on a limited license. So if you hold a limited license, make sure you're not signing status certificates, make sure you're not spending any more than $500 of your client's money. Financial mismanagement and improper procurement procedures as well. So for example, if the unaudited financial records that the manager or provider are maintaining, if they're not in good order, that can be a problem. Likewise, if the manager or provider is procuring for large contracts or services and is not engaging the board of directors, that can also be a problem. So make sure you're always keeping your board engaged and informed on these types of processes. We're also interested in things like receiving gifts from contractors or other parties. There's a provision very clearly under our code of ethics that says don't do that, because if anybody gets the idea that you're receiving gifts in a way that might impair your judgment or show some sort of favoritism towards a particular contractor, that's not a good thing. Again, it goes back to that impartial type of administrator role within the process. So small gifts to show as a token of appreciation, those are okay, but always be careful on this particular topic. Not acting in the best interest of your client. So remember, when we say client, we're talking about the condominium corporation. We're not talking about individual owners. It's important for condo managers in providing their services that they do what they do in the interest of their client. We like to call this piece out as well, because it's something that we consider as well internally when we're reviewing complaints as they come in. This is kind of a fundamental question that we want to ask. Was the manager looking out for the best interests of their client? And finally, unprofessional conduct, including things like harassment, discrimination, that type of stuff. Ali spoke earlier about some of the types of complaints that we've heard around conduct. A lot of the stuff we come in, it's often one person's word against another, quite frankly. We hear from different people across the sector, different people living in condos around Ontario. Our advice to managers is always stay professional, no matter who you're dealing with, no matter the situation, always be professional. If necessary, when the time comes, also engage your board, so to make sure that they know about what's going on as well, and document things so that if a complaint is filed, you're able to demonstrate to the CMRAO that you have been professional in interacting with the individual. Some issues that we don't want to hear about, anything that falls outside of our jurisdiction. So if it's not related to the provision of condominium management services, if it's a matter where really a person is not happy with the decision of the board of directors of a condominium, these are not matters that we want to hear about, because they don't fall within our jurisdiction, they don't fall within our mandate. There's nothing that we can do about them, quite frankly. So that's what we want to hear about and what we don't want to hear about. Next, intake process. So how do we receive complaints and how do we process them? So the vast majority of the complaints we receive, probably 99% or more, are filed online. They come in through our website. The complainant inputs kind of some key information about themselves, their name, the name of the manager, as well as a description about the complaint. And they also have the option of attaching any type of supporting documentation to go along with the complaint. And very importantly as well, the complainant also signs off on a waiver that effectively says they agree and they understand that the CMRAO can and will share the information that they've submitted with the person against whom they're complaining. So they have to put their name on it. Once we receive the complaint, we do an initial assessment. And first thing we're really looking at, which I just spoke to, is jurisdiction and mandate. So if the complaint is not about a CMRAO licensee and it's not about the provision of condominium management services, we will not proceed with the complaint. If it's about, again, like an unlicensed person that wouldn't require a license, we won't move forward with it. If it's actually an inquiry, sometimes we get complaints that are not really complaints, they're actually questions, we don't move forward with that. And in some cases as well, if the complainant is simply not willing to participate in the process, sometimes we can't proceed with the complaint. But if it is about a licensee, if it is about condominium management services, then we'll proceed. And the types of things that we're going to look at next would be things like the clarity, the completeness of the complaint. So are there really clear allegations, or are these just generalized statements? What's the complaint about? Is it about repairs or rudeness, or is it about something a bit more escalated, things like I talked about the transfer of records or financial management? We're considering also the perspective of the complainant. Are they complaining as an owner? Is it an individual board member? Is it the board collectively filing the complaint? Is it the incoming condominium manager that's filing a complaint? And we're also looking at things like impact and sensitivity. Is it a time-sensitive matter? How serious are the allegations? All these types of things. We do, more often than not, have to go back to the complainant to clarify exactly what the matter is about, get more information, we assess that, and we go from there. So that's kind of the high level what happens when a complaint comes in our door. And then next, I want to talk about the types of principles that we consider when we're evaluating a complaint. So there are three things here we've got listed on the screen: fair process, privacy/discretion, as well as due diligence. When I talk about fair process, remember what I said about that waiver coming in. So if you're a licensee, if you're a condo manager or management provider company, and somebody files a complaint against you, well, you have a right to defend yourself against that complaint. And part of that involves knowing who said what about you. So very important that you have a fair opportunity to comment. In a lot of cases, if we send a written request for information about a complaint, it's important that we give you adequate time as well to be able to respond to that complaint. It's not fair to expect people to always just drop everything and provide a response right here and now. We have to give enough time. So fair process is important. The next is privacy and discretion. So when a complaint comes in, we do not broadcast it. In most situations, I would say the complaint stays between the complainant, the CMRAO, and the manager who they filed the complaints against. In some cases, yes, we do need to involve other people. Sometimes we need to interview other people to understand the complaint better. That might include board members at the condominium, from time to time, vendors, contractors, but generally speaking, it's a very tight process between, again, the complainant, us, and the licensee. We don't publish the complaint as it comes in. The only time when we actually do get to publishing is when there's actually an action on a license. So if something gets to that point where it gets escalated, and say we were to suspend a license as an example, then yes, that would become published. But as the info comes in and as we're dealing with it, nothing's being broadcasted. And finally, due diligence. So when a complaint is filed, we take it seriously. CMRAO is a consumer protection body. We're created by the provincial government in the interest of consumer protection. We read and we assess every complaint that comes in our door. We read it carefully. We make sure we understand everything that's going on before we take any types of next steps, which would include even engaging the licensee, whatever the case may be. We do take it seriously. So that's what to expect from CMRAO. And finally, sorry, I got one more piece on this before we take I think we have another quick break in just a second. Numbers. So Ali had spoken earlier about the volumes we've been seeing over time. Today, as of this morning, we have 3,433 total licensees in Ontario. That includes just about 400 licensed provider companies. And within the past year or so, we processed just about 800 complaints. So if you do the math on this, and Ali mentioned earlier, what that equals is about 1 complaint for every 4 licensees within the province. So volumes are high, but I do want to note that the vast majority of the complaints are closed without any sort of regulatory action on the part of the registrar. If I'm not mistaken, I think there are between 1.5 and 2 million or so people living in condominiums in Ontario. So there are a lot of people who every single day are engaging with condo managers around the province. We put these numbers up here because we want to let people know it's not uncommon. Complaints happen. So if you're a licensee and if you get a call or an email, or maybe you already have received a call or an email from the CMRAO and we're requesting information related to a complaint that we've received, don't necessarily be shocked. It happens. What we request is that you take the case seriously and that you participate within the process and provide a response to the information we're looking for. So that's that.
That's great. Thanks very much, Sandy. So I'm going to jump in with another poll question, and actually there are two of them and they're related. So we'll do both polls in quick succession. The first poll should be coming up on your screen right now. Have you ever had a complaint filed against you? This is more specifically for condo managers and provider companies. Have you ever had a complaint filed against you? We'll keep the poll open for another few seconds. We're still collecting responses. Another 2 seconds and then we'll close. Okay, that's great. So I see 72% of the people who are on the line have voted and 83% have not had a complaint filed against them, and 17% have had a complaint filed against them. That's great, thanks for sharing. And the second question is, have you ever filed a complaint? The poll should now be on your screen. Have you ever filed a complaint? Yes or no? This is for everyone. Okay, the responses are coming in. This is great. I love the participation. We're almost at 80%. This is great. And we've reached 80%. Let's close the poll. And 93% have said no, they have never filed a complaint. 8%, these numbers don't add up to me, but 93% said no, 8% said yes. Not my math.
It's a rounding.
It's a rounding, sure. Yeah. That's great. All right, Sandy, I'll let you take things.
Okay, thanks, Sahai. So into discipline. To preface this and to start on the discipline topic, first thing I want to say is that generally speaking, action against a license, so this would include proposing to revoke or suspend a license or place conditions on a license, are generally not the first consideration when a complaint is filed. So those types of actions are really reserved for the most serious types of cases where simply the registrar can no longer reasonably believe that a licensee will perform their activities in accordance with law and with honesty and integrity. So I want to put that out there. Again, as I said before, many complaints are closed without any type of action. A lot of complaints may also be either resolved, or we may issue a reminder to a licensee about their obligations under the Code of Ethics. We may even issue a warning. But again, action against the license is not very common at all. It has happened. We'll get into some numbers on that in a minute. But again, also that decision is taken very, very seriously and reserved for very exclusive types of cases. So next slide. The diagram on the screen now basically plots the different types of channels that can be used to decide on a complaint. So I'm going to start in the middle actually, which is registrar's actions. So registrar does have the power to propose, I say propose, that's really important, to suspend a license, to revoke a license, or to place conditions on a license. So we'll use the example of suspension. If the registrar proposes to suspend a license, at first it is just that, it's a proposal. The license is still active. The person would be issued a notice of proposal. They would outline the reasons why the registrar is proposing to suspend the license. And the person would be given 15 days to appeal that decision. So they would have to file that appeal both to the CMRAO as well as to the License Appeal Tribunal. So if the licensee does file that appeal within 15 days, the license will remain active until the License Appeal Tribunal hears the case. And License Appeal Tribunal, or LAT as we call them, they'll decide to either uphold that decision or not. So if they uphold it, it's at that point in time that the suspension would become in effect. If they don't uphold the decision, and the license is not suspended, then the person would carry on. So that's the registrar track. At the top, we also have a discipline committee option. So we haven't used our discipline committee yet. I'm sure we will. If a matter gets referred to the committee, they form a panel, and basically the CMRAO and the registrar would present the case, what's happened. The licensee would have that opportunity to defend themselves, and the panel of the committee would hear the case, and they would make a decision, and they are the ones that actually decide whether or not somebody has breached the code of ethics regulation. So if that panel decides that yes, licensee has breached the code of ethics and these are the particular sections that they've breached, that committee and the panel has the power to take certain actions. They can require that the licensee take some sort of education. They can fix and impose the costs of the discipline proceedings on the licensee. And they also have the unique power of being able to issue fines. So actually the registrar's office does not fine people, but the discipline committee can. If the committee has a finding against a licensee, they say that they breached the code of ethics, the licensee still also has the option of appealing that decision to the appeals committee. So they would form another panel that would then hear the case again and determine whether or not to uphold or not uphold that decision, or even amend the decision. So that's the discipline committee route. And then finally, we also have a statutory director. Statutory director hears or handles cases referred to them by the registrar, and they oversee investigations. So investigations are different from inspections. These are cases where now the statutory director and through the investigation, they're gathering information and they're trying to determine whether or not the Condominium Management Services Act has been breached. So for example, providing condominium management services without a license, that is an offense in Ontario. It's a provincial offense. And if based on an investigation, the statutory director believes that somebody has committed that offense, they can take the case to court, and the courts will hear it and they'll decide whether or not it's happened. So those are the three different channels available for dealing with complaints. Next. Again, I think this diagram here just kind of, again, illustrates, there's a line here we see, there's other authority under statutory director and discipline committee, and then the options which are available under the registrar's purview. I spoke, I think, at length about the action on a license, and I've referred earlier to some of the other options. So registrar can also issue a warning. Registrar can also require a licensee to take education. Example might be taking a course on, say, business ethics, if the registrar feels that's appropriate. Mediation and resolution is possible, and simply closing the complaint without any action is also a possibility. And public registry, we put this up here because once the results of an action are posted in public, so for example, if a license is revoked, that would show up in the public registry. So if you were to search for the person, you would find the fact that the license has been revoked. You may find additional information. If there were a finding of the discipline committee, again, you would find that in the public registry. And the panel's decision note, that would be posted here as well. So it becomes public through the registry. We also have a section on our website called compliance. And under that section, you can find standalone cases of disciplinary types of action that have taken. So you can either search by the action itself, or you can, when you're searching for people, if you find something, it'll pop up on a licensee's profile in the registry. Types of action. So to date, we've either initiated or concluded 5 investigations. That's under the power of the statutory director. All the investigations we've conducted so far have been related to unlicensed practice, and they have led to 4 charges being laid. So this is also posted on our website. There is currently a matter in front of the courts waiting to be disposed of. So we're at that stage now. We've also conducted or are conducting 11 inspections. Inspections are carried out underneath the registrar's purview. And we have suspended 2 licenses to date. So
great.
That's that.
Thanks, Sandy. So just before we get into the questions, I just wanted to do a quick note so that you know that there is information available. If you have specific questions about complaints, feel free to reach out to our staff. You can send an email to info@cmrao.ca. You can also phone us. There's content on our website specifically related to complaints, so you can go there. In addition to that, we are developing a resource, which will essentially be a guide to the complaints process. It'll be a summary of today's presentation, in addition to questions and answers. We've had nearly 40 questions submitted as part of the registration process. That's a lot. And there are additional questions that continue to come in right now during today's webinar. So it's not likely we're going to get through everything. We'll do our best to get to as many questions as possible. But anything that we aren't able to get to will be part of this document that we create, and will be a Q&A section. Which leads us to questions. There's still a fair bit of time left for questions. As I said, we'll try our best to get to as many of them as we can. If you still have something that you want, if you want some information clarified, please feel free to type your question into the question box of your control panel. And again, we'll do our best to get to it. So just to start things off, here's a question we received. Who is permitted to submit a complaint?
You want to go, Ellie? Or?
Go ahead.
Well, I guess the short answer is anybody can submit a complaint. There's no restriction on who can do it. I spoke earlier to the different groups we've heard from. You know, owners complain, board members have complained, other managers have complained, tenants have complained, and we've heard also at certain industry events, I've heard managers say like, well, why can a tenant complain? In certain situations, a tenant has interactions with the condo manager, and if a manager's been unprofessional with a tenant, used derogatory language or something like that, then that's still inappropriate. That said, we do also understand, and we've certainly seen complaints that we've received from tenants, that generally speaking, the relationship here is between the condominium and the owner, and then the owner has a relationship with the tenant. So we understand those things, but notwithstanding all of that, there's no limitation on who can actually file a complaint. So.
Okay. Next question. Does CMRAO verify if the manager is being harassed before deciding on the outcome of a complaint?
As part of the complaint process, we can kind of prejudge the context of the complaint. So for us to be able to even ascertain whether or not let's say a condo manager is being harassed, we have to know the case, we have to understand the details, we have to communicate with both sides. And if at the end that is the conclusion, which would lead then for us to, issuing the, closing decision and communicating that to both parties, that will be the case. But it's very difficult at the front end to make that call before assessing the complaint itself.
Okay. As a manager, the board wants me to do something that may contravene the act. I assume that's the CMSA, Condominium Management Services Act. How do I?
Condo Act.
Or Condo Act.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How do I proceed? What if they file a complaint against me as a result?
Well, I think the short answer is if a board is telling you to do something that's illegal, don't do it. And if a board files a complaint against you for refusing to do something which was illegal, then I would say you shouldn't worry from our perspective that because you haven't done anything wrong. In fact, you should be advising your board and telling them not to do things that would contravene the Condominium Act. So,
yeah, I think it's essential to understand that the licensees, they have obligation with respect to their license and the terms of their license, and anything illegal would constitute a violation of the Code of Ethics. And that has to be clear. It's important for the condo managers to make sure that that is being communicated to the board and that there is a record of that communication that happens. But under no circumstance, you should do something illegal, notwithstanding where you are getting the direction.
I think that's good as well. Like documentation is also often really important, these types of cases. Send an email, for example, to show I said no, don't do that.
Okay. Let's stick with another question about a board this time, about the board. I am a board member. I found out a fellow board member made a complaint to the CMRAO without notifying the rest of the board, and we do not agree with the allegations made. Can the CMRAO dispose of the complaint since it was not filed by the board as a whole?
If an individual board member submits a complaint and is not authorized to do that on behalf of the board, from CMRAO's perspective, that's an individual complaint. On top of that, if a board has a different point of view than one of its members as an individual, by all means, you should contact CMRAO and to make sure that CMRAO has the information about the board's perspective on a particular complaint.
Yeah, and we've certainly received complaints from individual board members that don't agree with the rest of the board, and we've seen scenarios where then the rest of the board has contacted us and said, we understand this individual has filed a complaint and we don't agree with it. In the end, we look at all the information that's presented and we do our assessment and make a decision based on that. But yeah, an individual board member without the support of the rest of the board, it's still an owner or it's a person who's filed a complaint.
Okay. As a licensee, if multiple complaints have been filed against me, will the CMRAO take any action based on the number of complaints that were registered against me, the licensee?
So based on pure volumes, numbers, no. This happens, and we have seen cases, in fact, where even a group of owners has submitted the same complaint multiple times. So one owner will file it, and then another comes in, and then it's happened. It's certainly discouraged. We don't need 10 or 20 identical complaints of the same matter. In fact, it just clogs things up. We do still have to read them and check them. So no, like the sheer volume alone, that's not something to worry about. If there's a particular trend starting to emerge, like if we've received numerous complaints and we've issued warnings and reminders and we're of the view that a licensee has done something wrong on a more consistent basis, it might warrant, say, an inspection to look into the services, particularly in the case of a management provider. But also each complaint is evaluated independently based on its merits, right? So that's, I think, really important to note as well.
Okay, and then just a follow-up, I guess, another question, but it's related. As a licensee, if a complaint is filed against a licensee, will that stain their record with the CMRAO?
No, like, well, unless it escalates to the point where there's been a finding or we've determined that the licensee has done something wrong. But a complaint is just a complaint, and unless the registrar is of the view that the licensee has actually, say, breached the Condominium Management Services Act or decided to refer the matter to discipline committee, there's no stain on the record. And we certainly track and evaluate complaints and have ways of knowing a complaint came in, there was no action taken, there was no view that the licensee did anything wrong. So no, like on its own, complaint itself, no.
Okay. If a complaint was made against a company with proof of wrongdoing, how are they still able to obtain and keep their license?
Well, so obtaining and keeping a license, it's very clearly defined. It's under Section 37 of the Condominium Management Services Act, critical section. Everybody here has to know that section. It's the one that basically says it's the test for licensure. It says if the registrar is not of the view that the person can reasonably be expected to perform their duties with honesty and integrity and in accordance with the law, and there's also particular focus on financial management as well, then it's at that point that a license could be revoked or suspended. But for any type of wrongdoing, it doesn't necessarily rise to the level of taking the license away, right? So the matter has to be certainly serious and has to bring the registrar to the point of saying, I can't trust this person to do their job honestly and with integrity and in accordance with the law.
CMRAO has undertaken inspections of companies which we may have received complaints about wrongdoing or violation of code of ethics or the law, and we have taken steps to deal with those companies. So they're no different than the individual licensees from our perspective. However, you have to be careful about when we are talking about proof of wrongdoing. That is an outcome which the process at CMRAO has to come up with in order to take the action. and we treat the companies and individuals in the same manner.
And then another follow-up here. And if the management company loses its license, are they obligated to inform their board?
If they lose their license, I would say it's only ethical to do so. We haven't, run into a situation yet where we've revoked a company's license, but I think it would also be pertinent on the CMRAO to look into ways of being able to reach out to those boards to inform them of what had happened as well. I think if something rises to that level where a company has lost its license, yeah, boards should know about that.
And it's also important that from that point on, once they lost the license, if they continue operating and providing services, that is no different than any other company which is providing unlicensed services, and it's illegal and it's subject to the actions in the court.
Okay, Sandy, I think you touched on this one already, but I'll ask it anyway. Where can we find the results of complaints? Is that available to the public?
Well, unless the complaint actually leads to some type of action against the licensee, then you won't find those results. They're private. Again, they're between us, the person who filed it, and the licensee against whom the complaint was filed.
Okay, let's see what else we have here. As a licensee, am I obligated to participate in the complaints process?
Yes. Yeah, you are. Short answer. And there is actually a section under the CMSA about this, which says that basically if we request information of a licensee, then they'll provide that information as soon as practicable. So yes, you're required to participate. Yes, you're required to answer our questions. I did mention earlier, though, that it's important to have a certain allowance for time, right? So complaint comes in, it's not a presumption of guilt. So if we're going to write to you and ask questions of you, and we're looking for a response, we want to make sure we give enough time to be able to give a proper response. I think often 4 weeks is a measure we've used to get people to respond to those types of questions.
Okay, we have time for a few more questions. Let's see here. If the complaint is not valid, is the manager notified anyway that a complaint was filed against them? And I guess a little bit of detail about the nature of the complaint.
There's certain situations where, for example, a person has filed a complaint where the details of the complaint are entirely about a superintendent and what the superintendent has done wrong, how rude the superintendent has been. The superintendent came into their condominium without any type of notice, all these types of things. And they happen to have the name of the manager also listed on the complaint. In those types of cases, if we're able to call the owner and explain the situation and say, yes, we've received this, but you understand that you haven't detailed anything that the manager has done wrong. You've only talked about the superintendent. We don't see anything here related to the provision of condominium management services. And the complainant says, okay, yeah, I understand. I see this is outside your wheelhouse. You can't deal with this. Those types of scenarios, then we can resolve it. No, we wouldn't share all the details. But in most situations, yes, the manager will receive the details of the complaint that's been filed.
Okay. Who appoints the members of the discipline committee?
Members of the discipline committee was appointed by the board of the CMRAO, and it follows a process for identifying individuals and review of the applicants for it. But it's the responsibility of the board of the CMRAO.
And along those lines, another question, who sits on the appeals tribunal and how are those members?
So there's a discipline committee and there's an appeals committee, and actually it's one big pool of individuals with separate chairs. So the chair of the discipline committee, so say if CMRAO decides to take a case to discipline, chair of the discipline committee will do the arrangements to form a panel that would hear the case. And if that case ends up going to the appeals, then the chair of the appeals committee would form a separate panel, new members, new people, to hear that case at that point in time. But they draw from the same pool of individuals.
Okay. I'm hoping I didn't ask this question already, but As a licensee, how can I protect myself from frivolous complaints?
So I think it's important to know you can't prevent, right? Like some people will complain. They will file no matter what you do. You might be the most professional manager out there and bend over backwards to accommodate people, and they'll still file a complaint about you. It's happened, right? You can't necessarily prevent it. But so some of the things that are important, and I did talk about this a little bit during the presentation as well, is always remember that your job in this position is to be professional, to be cordial, to record things, to document things. So if you have a particular owner at your condominium that you think might file a complaint and without good reason to do so, make sure that all of your interactions with them are always professional. Write to them in a professional way. Make sure that they're informed. So for example, if your condominium is deciding to take some form of action, say a chargeback is coming to that person for valid reasons, of course, make sure that they fully understand the reasoning why, and make sure that the documentation and everything that goes along with it, I know I said it probably 120 times, but always be professional in your interactions so that if a complaint does get filed, then you have the record to be able to submit along with it. So that's one tip, I guess. But you know, in the end, you can't prevent everybody in every situation.
Okay, let's see what we have here. Is the management company of a licensee informed if a licensee has a complaint that has been filed against them, and what about the outcome?
So depending on the scenario, there is certainly a provision under the Act which says if the registrar sends a written request for information to a licensee, then a copy of that written request will also go to the principal condominium manager. So that, yes, in those scenarios. But there are also cases where we might have a complaint comes in and it's related to, let's say it's a matter of rudeness. The owner has informed us of something. They feel that the manager has been rude to them in a certain interaction. If we feel that the matter can be resolved through a phone call with the manager, if we can get the information from the manager that way, then the principal wouldn't be engaged from the start of the process like that.
Okay, and I guess this is a follow-up from an earlier question. If a company loses its license, what stops them from opening a new company and I guess applying for a new condominium management provider license?
So when we're reviewing applications for a condominium management provider license, there are questions, and we are looking at the individuals that constitute that company. Basically, I'm not sure if I'm using the proper legal language on that, but basically the board members of that company, the officers of that company, and the shareholders. So they are required to tell us of any individuals that own 10% or more of the equity shares in the corporation. There are questions on the application around the financial responsibility and the character of the board members of that corporation as well. And in the end, if somebody were to lie to us about the makeup of that corporation, then that in itself, like that's the type of thing that would constitute a reason to revoke a license. So if we were to find out after the fact that Corporation A is actually just a reincarnated version of Corporation X, that would be a problem, and that's not okay. But we do have processes in place to review applications and see to it that that doesn't happen. We do also pull certain records to be able to validate who the board members are at that corporation before we approve an application. So
that's great. Thanks, Andy. And this is going to be our last question for the day, and I'll take this one. Will this presentation be made available? And the answer to that question is yes. Give us a few days, but a copy of the webinar will be posted on our YouTube channel as well as on the website. So, and we'll also announce it on social media that it's available. So, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions today. Thank you very much. As I said, there are a number of questions we were not able to get to, but we will be sure to include them in that resource guide that we're developing about the complaints process. So just quickly to recap today's presentation. Hopefully you learned a little bit more about why the CMRAO accepts complaints, how complaints are submitted to the CMRAO, a bit more about the complaints intake process, as well as the assessment process, and a bit of information about outcomes and remedies. Ultimately, the CMRAO intends for the complaints process to be fair, transparent, and a diligent process that respects privacy. So thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you connecting with us here today. I'd like to thank again our presenters, Arlani and Sandy Vizely. I'd also like to thank our behind-the-scenes webinar team, Karina and Danielle. And as a quick reminder, we will be sending out a short survey immediately following the webinar. So please do take a minute to share your feedback and let us know your thoughts about today's webinar. Thanks again for joining us, and we will see you next time.